Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Sina Sekheche, and as always, this lesson is brought to you by the Free State Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. So we are still continuing with the journey of our revision post the prelims. So we are targeting, remember, the challenging questions that you came across during your prelims. And for today's session, we are going to focus on evolution. I know this is quite a big topic, and most of you are finding this topic very challenging. However, we are going to unpack some of the things that where you can collect marks. Remember, at this point in time, it's all about getting those points. So please make sure you collect as many marks as you can on this topic. So let us unpack the topic and check. Remember, this topic weighs about 36% of your paper, which amounts to 54 marks. So if you can see for paper 2, this is the biggest topic. It is big because it is divided into many subsections, and you need to make sure that you unpack all. So we are going to unpack all of the subtopics in this topic, evolution. So for today's main focus is going to be on evolution. And my plea to you is that at the end of this session, please make sure that you go to your question papers or your previous question papers. You check all the questions on evolution. While it is still fresh in your mind, attempt to answer questions on evolutions only, just so you can see your progress, where you are going with this topic. So out of 54, have a goal to say, out of these 54 marks that will be distributed throughout the paper, how much are you going to get, or how much are you aiming to get? So have a goal to achieve. You cannot achieve something if you do not aim at it. So please make sure that you have a strategy and an approach for this topic. Right. So let us unpack. So this is a schematic diagram that shows you how flooded, how big this topic is with its different components. So you have to know what is the evidence for evolution, sources of variation, speciations, ideas about origins, those theories here, and reproductive strategies, artificial selection, and evolution in present day. So let us take a look at how we are going to unpack it, and you will take a look at where you are going to get marks. Remember, this is a revision. You've done this topic throughout the year. You've done it with me. You've done it with your teacher. But we just want to now emphasize on now where to collect those marks. Right. So when we unpack this topic, evolution, we see that from the exam guideline, we are expected to know the evidence for evolution. What is that evidence that scientists use to support the theory of evolution? Then you will look at the role of the fossil records, biogeography, modification by descent. This is where you are looking at the homologous structures, and genetics. So all of these are the things that the scientists use to support their theory of evolution. They don't just wake up and make a theory. They have things that they use to support their theory. So this is them. And then sources of variation. What brings variation in the species or amongst the species? Then you can unpack there. The first source can be meiosis, and then crossing over that is happening there. And then mutation is another source, random fertilization, and random mating. You need to explain how are these sources, or how are they sources of variation, or how do they bring about variation? And then the most biggest part that you think evolution is are these two theories, the theories of evolution by Lamarck and by Charles Darwin. Then you need to know or explain Lamarck's law, or Lamarck's explanation of how he thinks organisms or species evolved. Then he uses his laws of inheritance of acquired characteristics and the law of use and disuse. And then Darwin, he uses the theory, he explained the theory of evolution through natural selection. Then these two scientists, we can compare their ideas, and then we can crush the one that is not relevant based on scientific evidence, or how we know organisms, or how we think the most or the widely accepted one is. Then we can compare it to that one. And then the most recent also, this one, I see that most of you are not paying attention to it. Punctuated equilibrium. It is also another theory of how the scientists Eldridge and Gould, you will see those two scientists, think organisms evolved. So they are going to explain it. They explain it as the speed at which evolution takes place. So that is punctuated equilibrium. So punctuated equilibrium is another theory of evolution, and it is by Eldridge and Gould in 1972. So this is like the most recent one. Then artificial selection, where humans select the characteristics they want, or the animals and plants, in animals and in plants. So this is where now they are choosing the characteristic they want, and then they are breeding or making whatever animal or plant they want. Then that is your artificial selection. They are choosing. The human is the selection force here with artificial selection. Then speciation, you need to be able to unpack speciation, describe the whole process of how it happens. So speciation is the formation of new species. So how do species form? So you must pay attention to those geographical barriers, be able to identify and unpack the whole story of how new organisms are formed according to the speciation. And then we come to human evolution. With human evolution, the key things that you need to know are the similarities between the humans and African apes. So every time when they ask you about similarities, I will show you, you will remember using that diagram of a bobo, and then differences between humans and African apes. So you need to know the similarities, and also you need to know the differences. So when you do the differences, you are looking at the different parts. So you will check the pelvic bones, you will check the skulls, you will check the dentition, you will check all those. So once they talk about the differences, you must check those that are far from us. It means they are of the African apes. Then the ones that are defining of the humans, you will see them. They are more definite, and they are more complex, and they are more advanced. Then you will see that those ones are for the humans. And so you must be able to differentiate. You must be able to interpret a phylogenetic tree to show the place of the family Hominidae. So you need to know that lineage, that ancestry lineage of the family Hominidae. So we will look at a phylogenetic tree that shows that, and you must know the out of Africa hypothesis as it appears in your exam guideline. So this topic, it starts from evolution by natural selection, and then it comes to human evolution. So you need to know, and I will show you today. Don't worry. Today we are all about collecting those marks. Right. So let us start collecting. The first question that may come to you, or that might be posed to you on this topic, is what evidence was used, or what evidence was used to support the theories of evolution? You will start with the first one. Look at number one, biogeography. Biogeography talks about the distribution of the different species across the geographical masses, or across different areas. So if you take a look at this diagram, it is showing you an example of the ostrich family, or of the ostrich species. So if you take a look at in Africa, we are in Africa, right? We are in the southern Africa. So we are in South Africa. In Africa, this is the type of ostrich we see. However, when scientists go around the world, they see that in South America, they find something that looks like an ostrich, but it's called a rhea. And then in Papua in Guinea here, they find the cassowary. And then in New Zealand, they find the kiwi. In Australia, they find the emu. So all of these makes them to conclude that all of these organisms may have been related to a common ancestor, because they share some similarities, or they look alike. But because of them being found in different areas, they might have become different species but sharing a common ancestor. So your biogeography tells you that this distribution shows that there might have been a common ancestor, even though they are found in different parts of the world. Then this is what they use to support evolution, to say evolution might have happened because these look alike, even though they are from different regions. Then the second evidence that they use is genetics. Genetics is the most common one. I think it's the most understood one that gives you the similarities between the nitrogenous bases or the sequences of the nitrogenous bases between species. If you check the sequences of the nitrogenous bases of the chimpanzees, we compare that with the one of the humans, you check the similarities, they are able to identify that 98% of the sequences are similar. Then if they can come to that, they can conclude that this might have arose from a common ancestor. It means somewhere down the line, there is an ancestor between the two species. In this case, the example is the chimpanzees and the humans. So genetics provides that kind of evidence. So they don't just come up and say it without proving it with genetics, because then the genetics can provide that evidence to say these organisms are somehow related because their nitrogenous bases or the sequences or the arrangement are similar. Then there is some relation there, then meaning there was a common ancestor. Then homologous structures. This is modification by descent. Here you can take a look at these 1, 2, 3, 4 organisms. If you can check the arrangement of the parts or of the bones, it follows the same order, even though they are not the same structure performing the same function. But it can show you that somewhere when you compare the homologous structures of these organisms, they might have arose from a common ancestor, not unlike with the snake. You can't say the snake has the humerus, the ulna, the radius, the carpals, metacarpals, the phalanges. You can't say all of that. But if you follow this order of the human, you follow the order of the cat, you follow the order there of the whale, you can still see, even though the humerus here is shorter, the carpals and the metacarpals are a bit wider, but the order is still the same. So it shows you that this arrangement might have come from somewhere a common ancestor. So they will put all the organisms or the species that they want to compare, and then they will check how the homologous structures are against or the same, are similar, and then they can come to a conclusion to say this might have evolved from a common ancestor. So they use that also as evidence. Then the last one, which is also commonly known or commonly accepted by you, is the fossil records. You know, there are so many fossils that are studied by paleontologists. They are able to study these fossils. They are able to date them, tell us what type of environment they were living in. And in that, they can even compare their structures. They can compare everything from the information they study from a fossil. And the fossils can be an imprint or it can be a large fossil that you can see. They are able to study that information and then compare, make their comparative notes to say if this was living. Remember, they are able to also date the fossils. So when they date the fossils, they are able to tell us when it lived on Earth and when it went extinct. And from that information, you are able to tell that it might have arose from a particular common ancestor with another organism that you are studying or another species that you are studying. So all of this, remember, they provide evidence for evolution. So this is what scientists or the paleontologists are using to support their theory of evolution. So I hope now when they ask you what are the or what evidence was used by scientists to support the theory of evolution, you will boldly just write biogeography, genetics, homologous structures, and fossil records, because those are the things that were used to support evolution. Now, moving on, sources of variation. Throughout the year, when you were studying different topics, you came about this term. Variation. This plays a very important role in any species, because if you take a look at the species, not all species are the same. Even you with your siblings are not the same. Even though you came from your mother's ovum and your father's spermatozoa, you are not the same with your siblings. Why? It is because of variation. So what brings that variation? When they ask you about the sources of variation, you must be able to tell us that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sources of variation. So if we can remember the number 5, so if you can remember that 5, you can use this acronym here, CRRRM. So C3RM. So this 3R, you know, it is standing for the 3 R's between the C and the M. So C. What is C? The first source of variation. When we talk about source of variation, we mean what brings variation, something that introduces variation. So the first source will be crossing over. Where does crossing over takes place? In meiosis. So you know that what is crossing over? It is where non-sister chromatids are touching or overlapping at a point called the chiasma and exchanging the genetic material. So this crossing over, because it will happen in prophase 1, it is going to bring variation in all the gametes that are going to be formed during this process of meiosis, because it happens at prophase 1. So what brings variation? The first thing is crossing over during meiosis. So if you write meiosis, you will get 1 mark. If you write crossing over during prophase 1, then you'll get you can also get a mark, depending on what the marker or how they phrase the question. Another source of variation is random arrangement of chromosomes. So this is still in meiosis. So when you write meiosis, you might get 1 mark, but if you unpack to say crossing over and random arrangement of chromosomes, then you can get separate marks for that. Then, what is random arrangement of chromosomes? So if you take a look at this order, there is no particular sequence that these chromosomes are aligning with when they come and align themselves at the equator during metaphase 1. During metaphase 1 or during metaphase 2. So they arrange themselves randomly. Please use this term, random arrangement. I know some of you might be looking into old textbooks that might tell you about random assortment. Please refrain from using that term. The term that is accepted is random arrangement of chromosomes during metaphase. So that brings variation, because they do not follow a particular sequence. They arrange themselves randomly. Right. And then when you take a look at the second R, that was the first R, the second R, which is random fertilization. Here, if you take a look at this, then there is a number of sperm cells coming to fertilize this ovum here. So which sperm cell, remember these sperm cells, they all carry different genetic material because of this process in meiosis 1, in meiosis prophase 1 or in metaphase. So all of these sperm cells, they are genetically different. Now, which one is going to fertilize this ovum? There is also no order. The fertilization that is going to take place here is random. Hence, we say this random fertilization also brings about variation. So this is the reason why you and your siblings are not the same person. Because each time when your parents are having a child, if you were being fertilized from the same sperm cell, then it means you are going to be the same person. And also with the ova. So random fertilization also brings about variation. And then the third R stands for random mating. What is random mating? Look at this beetle over here. It can mate with this lighter beetle, with the same beetle of its kind, and with another shade of a beetle. So this random mating will also mean that the offspring will have maybe an intermediate color between this beetle here and this beetle here, beetle number 1 and beetle number 2. So there is some genetic variation that will be happening there. So this random mating, because you choose differently, you mate with different people, or these beetles will mate with different beetles, then it is random. You don't know the genetic makeup of that other beetle. So when you combine the two genetic makeup, they will then bring variation into the species. And then the last one, M. M stands for mutation. Now, mutation, here is the mutation. This is now the altering of the nitrogenous bases. Now, when you take a look at this one, when maybe the nitrogenous base cytosine was supposed to come into the sequence of the nitrogenous bases, and then it was replaced by a different one, it will therefore form a different protein. So you see, it will bring a different amino acid and form a different protein. So that brings also variation, because most of the things are proteins in the human species. So all of these CRRRM are the sources, or the 5 sources of variation. This question, it can come in meiosis, it can also come in genetics, and it can also come in evolution, like it is now we are discussing it under evolution. So expect this question throughout those 3 topics. Right. And then the types of variation. We have 2 types of variation, that is continuous variation and discontinuous variation. What is continuous variation? This is where characteristics where there is a range of intermediate phenotypes. So if you take a look at this learners over here, their height. No 2 people have the same exact height, unless, yes, you are using a large sample. However, if you can take a look at the people in your class and you stand there in a row, you will find that there are people who are 2.3, 2.4, 2.1. So there is a lot, there is a range. There is a range in the characteristics. So it is not just tall or short. You don't say people that are tall are 1.7 and people that are short are 1.2 or 1.0. No, there are numbers in between. So there is a range of intermediate phenotypes. So you'll find others that are tall, but they are not as tall as others. You'll find others that are short, but they are not as short as others. Skin color as well. Look at their skin colors. Even if you can say people are white or people are black, there are different shades of white, different shades of black, different shades of brown. So you cannot, skin color is also another type example of continuous variation, because there is a range of intermediate phenotypes, those ones that come in between. Hair color, no 2 people have the same exact hair color, because like in your class, if you can check, you have black hair or you've got brown hair, but not the same shade of brown. Unless you have a large sample, then maybe you can find some people matching. However, it is not something that is distinct to say people have black or they have brown only. There are different types or different shades of brown, there are different shades of black. So I think you understand. So it is continuous because there is a range of intermediate. And then the second type of variation is discontinuous variation. What is discontinuous variation? It is whereby the characteristics falls in distinct categories. Now, distinct categories, examples are blood groups. It says that it's either you are blood group A or blood group B or blood group AB or blood group O. So those are distinct. There is nothing in between. There is no blood type Z, there's no blood type WB, there's no, it's either you are A or B or AB or O. So those are distinct category. You only fall into that and nothing else. And another example of discontinuous is fingerprints. No 2 people share the same fingerprints. So unless maybe they are identical twins. But this, you see the arrangement of these fingerprints, it's just so meticulous in such a way that you cannot have the same as another person. Now, this forms part of a discontinuous variation. So not 2 people share the same. And another one can be distinct categories that you can think of, male or female. When you are born, you are either born being a male when they define your gender, or a female. So that is a distinct category. So there is nothing in between. Please do not misquote me. I'm not talking about gender, or I'm not talking about identity or sexual identity, the way people identify themselves, but just as you are born scientifically, you will then fall into that distinct category, right? So that is a discontinuous variation. Then we come to the theories of evolution. This is where now you are talking about the theories. Lamarck. I know by now you know who Lamarck is, and you know who Darwin is. You know these two scientists because you know there is the one that you do not agree with or that you do not like. That is John Baptist de Lamarck. Now this scientist in the early 1800s, remember the time, he explained evolution using the following two laws: law of use and disuse, and law of, please. Here we find that most of you are messing this word up and then it ends up meaning something else. Please, inheritance of acquired characteristics, meaning he's saying organisms are going to inherit some of the characteristics that were acquired by their parents. So inheritance of acquired characteristics. So he used those two laws using the giraffe. So let us explore these two laws that he used. So the first one is the law of use and disuse. I know you master this one because it makes more sense to you. It's funny to you. You relate to it in terms of it being a joke. So please use that to obtain your marks. The law of use and disuse. You can get a mark for just writing that. And then, what does it say? You must be able to explain what does it say. It says that when an organism uses a structure or an organ more or regularly, it becomes better developed or it is enlarged. So you see, this is the use. You've explained the use part of the law. And then you come to the disuse part. You still need to explore the disuse part. What does he say about an organism not using an organ or a structure? He says that, now, if an organism does not use a structure or an organ frequently, it becomes less developed or it is reduced in size and may disappear altogether. So this one is the one where you need to collect marks at. So you see, there are 4 possible marks that you can get from just writing that. Lamarck first explains his theory of evolution by saying that you use the law of use and disuse. And then you explain what is the use. When an organism uses the structure or an organ more frequently, it becomes more developed or it is become enlarged. Then if an organism does not use, now you are coming to the disuse, or does not use that structure or an organ, it may be reduced in size or it may disappear altogether. So you see, you have already collected 4 marks, possibly. So there's a possibility of getting 4 marks there. Then you come to the inheritance of acquired characteristics. He doesn't end there. He continues to say, so this is the second law, characteristics developed. Now he's saying, those characteristics that are developed during the life of an individual, those ones that are acquired, because they come after, they are acquired through a lifetime. He says they can be passed on to the offspring. And I want you to take note of that. Here we are talking about characteristics. We are not talking about an allele. So this is something that is different from Darwin, because Darwin is talking about an allele, but the Lamarck is talking about characteristics. So meaning whatever that you see on the outside, the trait is going to be passed on to the offspring. Right. So that is what he says. And you can also get a mark out of that one. So please make sure that you collect whatever scenario that you are given. Make sure that you trace, you tell us about the use, the disuse, and what is going to happen about that characteristics that has been acquired. It is going to be passed on to the offspring. Please collect the marks there. Right. So if we can take Lamarck's approach, applying it into the giraffe situation. he would explain the theory of the evolution of the giraffes in this way. He would say that all giraffes had short necks originally. This is something that is so different also from Lamarck. Pay attention to this. The starting point of Lamarck and the starting point of Darwin. Lamarck starts by saying, you see this first giraffe here, you see the first one. He says all had short necks. You see it has a short neck. It has a short neck. So according to him, all species were the same. So in the situation that you will be given, you must look for that. If they are talking about the tongue, they are talking about the neck, they are talking about the tail, you must say all had short or all did not have or something. But you must say all of them were the same. And then what happened with the giraffes? The giraffes then frequently stretched or used their necks. So this is the law of use. They used their necks to reach for leaves of tall trees. So they frequently used. So you see now they are frequently stretching. These are tall trees. So they need to reach for food at the tall trees. So the environment means it changed. There was no food now to their reach. The food was higher up on the tall trees. They frequently now did what? They frequently stretched their necks to reach for food on the tall trees. Then what happened? According to Lamarck, he says, then this caused their necks to become longer. I think you are thinking of many scenarios where you can try to practice this, but it will not work because we know that's not how science works. So he says that causing their necks to become longer. Right. Now that the necks are longer, here, they kept on stretching. Okay, we can say stretching and stretching until they are longer. So when they are longer, the characteristics of long necks is acquired in this way. So you must tell us now you are chasing what? The acquired characteristic. Then if it is acquired in this way, it is then passed on to the next generation. Please, please, please take note of this word. Characteristic. We are not talking about an allele because he is not talking about genetics. He is talking about the physical trait or the phenotype, the characteristic that is outside that you can see. Right. So then it can be passed on, or it can be inherited by the next generation, then forming the offspring with longer necks. Then you have all now with longer necks. You see, they started with short, but now all of them have longer necks than the generation before. So according to him, this is how he would say the long necks of giraffes evolved. Then there are a few things that I would like for you to remember when you are doing this. Please remember that inherited characteristic is a characteristic that an offspring is born with, having been inherited from one parent, and then a characteristic is controlled by a gene. This is very important. Whatever that you inherit from your parent, you don't just inherit it by just talk or by just doing. It must come through genes. So you inherit it by genes. Then an acquired characteristic, acquired now, it is that one that an offspring is not born with. You are not born with. You acquire it throughout your lifetime or through the course of a lifetime. And now this characteristic is not controlled by genes. For an example that is more practical, if you are born being skinny and then you start going to the gym and building your muscles and eating food that builds muscle, and then you have muscles, it means now you have acquired that characteristics of big toned muscles over your lifetime. But it does not mean you can pass that on to your offspring. I think it makes sense. Then there are guiding questions to think of when you are answering this question. So what are those guiding questions? These are the questions that can lead you to the answer because you are trying to find out or trying to interpret the situation. So the first thing that you need to ask yourself is, what was the original characteristic? This is where you will trace that all of them had short necks, or all of them, whatever situation you are given there. And then what was the challenge? There was no food available on short trees anymore. Food was available on higher trees. Then what happened? What did the organism do? You see, what did the organism do? The organism kept on stretching their necks, stretching their necks, stretching their necks to reach for food on taller trees. And then what was the result? It resulted in giraffes with longer necks. And then what happened? So they acquired that characteristic through their lifetime of doing. And then the result would be, and then what happened to that acquired characteristic? You must ask yourself. That characteristic, you must tell us that it was passed on. You must say characteristic. It was passed on to the offspring. And then what was the result of that? You have now a new generation of the species that have that particular characteristic. So in this case, if you are using the giraffe, you'll say now you have a generation of giraffes with longer necks. So you see, use these guiding questions. Ask yourself these questions when you are interpreting a paragraph where they say you must explain according to Lamarck. Then, Lamarck's theory, we know it was rejected, but why was it rejected? Lamarck's theory was rejected. This is a question that will come in your exam. They will ask you, why was Lamarck's theory rejected? These are the reasons that you need to say. Always, always, always. There is no evidence that acquired characteristics are inherited by offspring. So there's no evidence that those acquired are inherited by offspring. We don't know. Then organisms did not evolve because they were determined to change. Or you can simplify this one to say organisms did not evolve because they want to. Then an organism cannot change its DNA. An organism cannot just wake up and change its DNA. DNA is your genetic makeup. You are born with that and you inherit that through genes and alleles. According to Mendel, it is the genotype that determines the phenotype, not the other way around. So you can't say your physical appearance is the one that is going to influence the physical appearance of the offspring. No, the genes that you carry are the ones that give you your phenotype or your physical appearance. And then if you pass those genes to your offspring, then yes, your offspring might have the similar characteristics with you because you passed on the allele or the genes that gave you also those phenotype or the physical characteristics. So these are the reasons why Lamarck's theory was rejected. Then you come to Darwin. Darwin, he wrote a book or published a book in 1859, in the 1800s. That is a long time ago. The book was called The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So his theory is based on natural selection. According to him, evolution took place in natural selection according to these two main points. He says that species were not created in their present form, but they evolved from ancestral species. So an example that he gives is the example of the whales that you see there. This is a whale. So according to him, he says, what you see today, it did not start by just appearing as what it is. It has evolved from common ancestor. So it has evolved from ancestral species. And then he says that the mechanism of that evolution was through natural selection. Don't worry, he's going to explain how. So he explained that mechanism of natural selection in this way. Remember how Lamarck starts. Lamarck starts by saying all organisms were the same. However, Charles Darwin starts by something different because he works with genetics, he works with science and evidence. Now, Charles Darwin starts, this is, even if you can forget anything, please remember this first statement. There is a great deal of variation amongst the species. So it means not all species are the same. There's a great variation. If we are talking about the giraffes, there will be giraffes with long necks and giraffes with short necks and middle necks and whatever. Remember. So he's talking about variation amongst the offspring. Please use the correct word here. Offspring. Then he explains this variation. What is that variation? Some have favorable characteristics and some do not. You can get a mark for that. And then when there is a change in the environment, remember they are fine, they are different. Some have favorable and some do not have favorable characteristics. Then you come to introduce something. When there's a change in environmental conditions or when there is competition, you get a mark for that. The organisms, this story, it must come easy to you. It must come easy to you because you are relating. Tell it as a story that has a chronological flow. You start by saying all organisms, there was variation. There was a great deal of variation. Then explain that variation. Then when you explain it, you will say some had favorable characteristics and some did not. And then you come to the environment where they are living. And then you say, when there's a change in that environment, when there's a change in the environment or there's competition, what's going to happen? Logic. When there's change, you must think. Those ones, the organisms with characteristics which make them more suited will survive. And those organisms with unfavorable characteristics which make them less suited will die. So you see, you've already received 2 marks for just saying that. And then what's going to happen? Can you continue to talk about the ones that are dead? No. When you continue your statement, you continue with the ones that survived. You say the ones that survived, they will reproduce. You get a mark. And that's past check this year. Now with Darwin, we are saying we are not talking about just a characteristic. We are talking about an allele. So it means it is at a gene level, DNA. So they then passing the allele for that favorable characteristic to the offspring. Then the next generation will therefore have a higher proportion of favorable characteristic. Please learn this story off by heart. You are going to be expected to answer questions on this. And your question 3 has evolution questions. So there is no way that you are going to miss this. They can either ask you to explain it as raw as it is from the exam guideline like we just did. Okay, they can ask you to apply it with an example. They can give you a scenario of an example and ask you, how would Charles Darwin explain the evolution of the particular species in that example that you have? Be able to apply this to that example and be specific to the example and without being general. This one is the generic one, but you may be asked to apply it. Go and practice that. There are 6 marks that you can get there, and there are more than 6 marks, but it is mostly asked for 6, 5, 4 marks. Please make sure that you collect those marks. Then another theory is punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism. This theory, I said it's a theory as well. So it was the people who came up with this theory are Eldridge and Gould. Remember them? In 1972. So this is the most recent, 1972, in the 1900s, not in the 1800s. They say that punctuated equilibrium explains the speed at which evolution takes place. So now they are focusing on the speed. Remember, with Charles Darwin, you can say evolution happens over millions of years and it happens gradually. You don't just see change like that. But with Eldridge and Gould, they are talking about a different speed. They say evolution involves long periods of time where species undergo little change or do not change at all. So you will see that stage is known as equilibrium. So the species will not change or they will change just a little over long periods. Then it is followed or it is alternating with, which is punctuated now. With you follow the traits or you follow the characteristics of the previous ones. So they are saying long periods of no change followed by short periods of rapid change. So that is their punctuated equilibrium. The diagrams that can explain the differences between punctuated equilibrium and gradualisms are this. If you take a look at this first diagram, you see the red here. It is gradually changing. You can refer to the previous one This one you can refer to the previous one, also this one. So you can see the change coming gradually. So the gradual changes in the species are occurring as a result of a series of small changes. So you see a small change from 1 to 2 to 3 and 4 and then 5 and 6. You see the change coming gradually. But with punctuated equilibrium, there is no change, rapid change occurs, and it is followed by a long period of no change. So you see from this red over here, you can see when you go up there, it is equilibrium. You can see it's still changing, but just a little. But here, there was a period where rapid evolution took place. You see, it all of a sudden, white mice appeared, but you did not see it coming gradually. So when you see a sharp curve, or when you see a diagram turning into a sharp curve, then you know that is rapid. Please follow that one. So that is punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism. Then we come to artificial selection. Artificial selection is the intentional reproduction of individuals in a population that have desirable traits or desirable characteristics. If you can take a look at the domesticated animals that we have here, you can take a look at the chicken in 1957. It was weighing around about 900 grams. Compare it to the most recent chicken that was weighed in 2005. It weighs about 4,200 grams. So we have moved from this to this. So how did that happen? The human selected the characteristics they wanted, and they started breeding the types of chicken they want with big muscles, so we can have more meat. It becomes more meatier. You see? So that trait is controlled by the humans. You can also look at the different types of cows. You can breed cows that can yield more milk, or you can breed cows that can give you more meat. Then whatever the desirable trait that the human want, they will select and then artificially select it and then breed according to what they want. They can do that also with the crops over there. So that is just an example of artificial selection. Then there is terminology that you need to take note of. From grade 10, you were defining species and population. So let us take a look at the differences. When you are talking about organisms of the same species, you are saying these organisms have the same characteristics. It must have three things. They are capable of random interbreeding, or you can say they are able to interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. So for it to be of the same species, it must meet all those three characteristics. It must meet all those three criterion. It must have the same characteristics, be able to interbreed, and produce a fertile offspring. Then you can talk about those being organisms of the same species. What is population? Individuals of the same species. Now you are saying those same species living in the same area or in the same habitat that can randomly interbreed. So the same species living in the same area, for it to be a population, to be counted as a population, it must live in the same area, and then it must be able to interbreed randomly. Then you can say these organisms are of the same population. Then speciation is a new term that you came across in grade 12. This is the evolutionary process by which populations evolve to become distinct species. Or you can say it's the formation of new species. That is speciation. And then after speciation, you must know that it is brought about geographical isolation, and also there are going to be reproductive isolation thereafter, because when species are no longer the same, then it means there are certain things that are going to stop them or to isolate them from reproducing with the original species, because now they are different. So you must know all those mechanisms I will show you just now. Then another thing that you need to know with natural selection is speciation. How do you define speciation? You can get a question that is asking you about the different types of plants or animals that were in the same area, but now they were separated. take note. Once they say they were separated, take note of what? The ocean, a mountain, a lake, a river, because that is your geographical barrier. That geographical barrier, you need to mention it in your answer. Do not lose marks if it is given there. Then if it is not given, yes, you are allowed to say just a geographical barrier. But if you are applying it to a scenario that you are given, it can be a compulsory mark. You may find out yourself, you are flowing, you are getting all the marks, then you lose that particular mark because they were asking for a geographical barrier. They wanted you to identify which geographical barrier is found in the particular question. So how do species form? Now, speciation through geographic isolation, meaning when there's a geographical barrier. So this is what happens. Please, when you are explaining speciation, you do not start by writing species. Because you are forming a species, you can't start by writing species, because you will be forming which species when you have already started with species. You start with population. So a population is split into two. You get a mark for that. A population will be there in one area. But through speciation, this population is going to be split into two by a geographical barrier. So this is where you get your second mark. By defining what is that geographical barrier that is splitting this population into two. A river, a sea, a mountain, or a lake. So you must find out which one is mentioned there. Then, because there is that separation, you see the separation here. This is the ancestral population that was split into two. Because of this separation, there is no gene flow between the two populations. So you get a mark for saying no gene flow. How can the genes flow when these organisms are no longer in the same area? So there is no gene flow. Because there is no gene flow, what is happening in each environment? The two populations are therefore exposed to different environmental conditions. And when they are exposed to the conditions this side A, are not the same as the conditions inside B. You will say they are exposed to different conditions. Therefore, each population undergoes natural selection independently. What does this statement mean? Natural selection occurs in here, meaning those that have favorable characteristics for this environment A will survive, and those that have a favorable characteristic for this environment B will survive. But don't explain it. Just say to us, because we know what you mean. Just say to us, natural selection will occur independently in each environment. Therefore, genotypically and phenotypically, these organisms are going to be different because they underwent natural selection independently. Therefore, if they were to mix again, can get a mark for that, they will not be able to interbreed. Why? Because now they are different genotypically and phenotypically. Then the two populations are now different species. So that is how you form new species. Please, people, follow the logic. Make the story make sense to you. Right, moving on. This is an example of the dog family that is found in the different regions as stated here. We have the jackal, the dingo, and the coyote. So the coyote, the jackal, and the dingo. These are the three different species of the dog family. But because of speciation, because of a geographical barrier, the ocean here or continental drift, you can see that they have evolved to become different species. So even if you take this one and try to interbreed with this one, it will not produce a fertile offspring. Therefore, we say they are different species. So this is just an example that you can look at. Now, once these organisms are different species, what is going to stop them from being able to interbreed? This is where we are talking about mechanisms of reproductive isolation. So reproductively, what isolates them? The first one, breeding at different times of the year. If you can take a look at this two species of the butterflies here, you can see that this one is reproducing during which months? July, August, September, October. But this second butterfly, when? March, April, May, June. This is the time when they are able to reproduce. So their times are not the same. So how can butterfly A be able to reproduce with butterfly B when their times are not the same? So the first one, it says breeding at different times of the year. That will isolate the organisms from being able to interbreed. The second one, species specific courtship behavior. Now look at this bird, this little bird over here. I like this picture because it's so funny at how this small bird is looking at this big bird, because it is as if it is saying, if it was a human being, say, what are you saying? I don't understand. What do you mean? What's up? You see, then this one is trying to court this one. However, this one is not impressed because it is now shocked to say, what are you doing? You see? So you can look at the expression of this little bird over here. So the species specific courtship behavior, it is expecting this big one to behave in a way that will communicate with it, that it will understand that this is what you mean. You want to mate with me. But the language there is not the same. You see? So this can also happen with human beings. I know you girls can also do this. Right. Plant adaptation to different pollinators. So you can see here, you have a plant that is pollinated by bees and here by birds. So if this plant needs to be pollinated by birds, even if a bee comes, it will not be pollinated. So that can isolate the reproduction between the two species. So we are looking at things that can keep them apart or stop them from being able to reproduce together after they become new species. You see? Then in fertile offspring, you see there's a picture here of a horse and a donkey producing, okay, this is a horse, this is a donkey producing a mule. A mule is an infertile offspring. If you want to have a mule, the only way to get a mule is if you interbreed a horse and a donkey. You cannot take a mule and produce another mule. Why? Because a mule is infertile. So because it is infertile, it proves that a horse and a donkey are not of the same species. So infertile offspring, this mule cannot produce anything. So sometimes after speciation, they only produce organisms that are infertile and cannot continue the lineage. Then prevention of fertilization. Look at this small dog here and this big dog here. Organs of copulation. You can see that there is no copulation that can take place here, or this the body size or whatever can prevent this big dog to fertilize this small dog here. So the prevention of fertilization. So these are the things that can stop organisms from being able to interbreed. Remember them. Remember them, because definitely this question will be in your question paper. Right. And then evolution, as it is happening nowadays in present times. We say evolution, it is continuing. We see this in rapidly reproducing species. Your species like your bacteria, your viruses, and the mosquitoes, they are reproducing rapidly. So because they reproduce very rapidly, we are able to see the change fast. We are able to see that evolution. So how does it happen? You can see in this population of bacteria here, the yellow dots are representing bacteria. And then you know bacteria, if it is a pathogen, you need to kill it with antibiotics. But the red dots are representing resistant bacteria, meaning it is resistant to antibiotics. When it is resistant to antibiotics, it means antibiotics will not be able to kill it, the red one. So you introduce the course of antibiotics to this bacteria that is yellow. What is the progress? You start seeing that the yellow bacteria dies. However, the red ones still remain. Why are they remaining? It is because they are resistant to the antibiotic. And when they are resistant, because they rapidly reproduce, what's going to happen? Because they are left, they are going to do what they do best. They are going to reproduce. What are they reproducing? They are reproducing one of the same of its kind. Now look at the red ones. The red ones are becoming more and more. When you come here, they're becoming more and more, meaning they are evolving to be stronger than the ones that appeared first, that died. They are now the ones that are stronger and surviving the antibiotics and reproducing to become more. Then at the end, you end up with a population of the mainly resistant bacteria. This is no longer the same as the initial bacteria that you were treating. So it has evolved. We have seen this also with COVID-19. Remember how many strains of COVID-19 we were told of. They were even starting to name them according to the Greek, what were the alpha and the omegas and the what. Remember, so each time there would come a new strain. Why? Because it kept on evolving. So those rapidly producing small organisms, they are showing us evolution is continuing to take place even in present times. So that is evolution in present times. You can expect questions of what is it, a case study there, then you can analyze. Then from your paper, the prelim paper that you wrote, this was a question about speciation in action. So let us take a look at what was happening here. In the summer of 1995, at least 15 iguanas. Some of you don't even know what an iguana is. This is the first time you are coming across this word in an exam. It does not matter. Understand the context. Understand the story behind what these iguanas are doing. You can form your own image of what an iguana is. However, an iguana is the reptile that looks like a lizard, but of a different sort. There, right. At least 15 iguanas from the island of Guadalupe survived the Hurricane Marilyn. So meaning there was a hurricane. You need to stop and analyze. So you go to the map and check, okay, here is the island of Guadalupe. Now this island, we say there was a hurricane here. Then there were 15 iguanas that were able to survive that hurricane. Then they rode the high seas for a month before colonizing the Caribbean island of Anguilla. Now you come. So they went for a month, they took a journey. What? Those iguanas, the 15 iguanas, they came and they colonized, they started settling here in the island of Anguilla. You are following the story so that when you come to answer, you understand what is happening. Then, these few individuals were the first of their species, iguana, to inhabit the island of Anguilla. Okay, then you make sense. Oh, so there were no iguanas there. Before these 15 arrived, there were no iguanas. They were the first to live there. Okay, already you are thinking, what's going to happen to them? You can ask yourself that question. Are they going to die? Are they going to survive? Are they going to reproduce? As a life sciences learners, you must have those leading questions in your mind. Read with understanding. Read with comprehension. Right. Scientists were eager to discover what would happen next. Like I said to you, have a question. Would the colonizing iguanas die out? Or would they survive and change only slightly? You are thinking of the word speciation. Okay, will they become new species, change slightly, or will they die? It's a question. Then, will they become reproductively isolated from the iguanas and become a new species? So the ones that are going to form, are they going to be reproductively isolated from the original species, or will they be able to interbreed with the original species? It's the main question. Right, now let us take a look at the questions. The first one, what is the geographical barrier in this case study? Geographical barrier. Some of you, I know you might be tempted to say, is the hurricane. No. What is separating the species? A hurricane was just an event that happened in this island of Guadalupe. That is 3.1. 3.2.2, if the iguanas survive, this is an if, how will scientists determine whether they remain the same species or become a new species? So how will they know if they survived and become more? How will they know whether they are original species or they become new species? You think, what does a species do? Then, if speciation did not occur, how would the reproductive isolated new species of the iguana differ from the original species? So now you are playing with situations. So let us take a look at the answers. Right, what is the geographical barrier here? The geographical barrier is the ocean or the seas or the high seas. Do you see what I did there? This is separated by the ocean. Remember, and these are islands. Islands, you know, they are a small piece of land in the middle of an ocean. So the isolating factor there, or the geographical barrier there, will be an ocean. Then, if the iguanas survive, now you are thinking, okay, those 15, if they survive, how will the scientists determine whether they remain the same species or become new species? You go to the characteristics of being the same species or of being different species. This is how you answer. The scientists are going to allow them to interbreed with the original population. You take them, you interbreed with the original population. What are you trying to check? If they produce a fertile offspring, you get a mark there, they are still of the same species. So you are proving. You have proved to us they are of the same species because they were able to interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. Another way, you can allow them to interbreed with the original population if they produce an infertile offspring. So this is just a little bit of an opposite to what you said first. Then you know if the offspring that is going to come is infertile. What does that tell you? They are not of the same species. So you've proved that whether they are of the same species or they are new species. That is how you prove it. Or you can say they can even check the DNA profiles. Very easy. Now this one is just an easy process. The DNA profilings can be done by comparing the DNA profile of an original species with the DNA profile of the new iguanas. Then when you compare the two, it will give you a definite answer of whether the nitrogenous bases, the sequence, and the arrangement are the same or they are different. Then if they are different, then you will know they are now different species. If they are same, then you will say they are the same species. So think outside the box. Apply your mind. Make the question make sense to you. Then the last one. If speciation did occur, how would the reproductive isolated new species of iguana differ from the original species? So we say now the new species are formed. How will they be different from the original? They will differ genotypically, or their genetic makeup will be different, or their alleles will be different. They will not be the same genetically. And phenotypically, remember the genes are what gives us our phenotype or our physical appearance. So phenotypically, they are not going to be the same. Right. Then name the two reproductive isolated mechanisms by which iguanas on the Anguilla Island could have become reproductively isolated. So now that if they are not able to interbreed, what are those mechanisms that can make them to be reproductively isolated? Think of those things that I was telling you, breeding at different times of the year, infertile offspring. You see, now you are applying what you've learned to say. Now the iguanas may, you see, breed at different times of the year. Species-specific courtship behavior. This can also isolate them reproductively. Remember the bird? Now thinking, what is this iguana doing? What are you saying? I don't understand. You see? So you are trying to court the iguana, but you are using a different method that the iguanas use originally. Producing infertile offspring and prevention of fertilization. So you're going to mark any two, but the first two only. Take note of that principle, because when you write all four of them, and then you mess up with the first two. The first two are incorrect, but the last two are correct. The marker is only going to focus on the first two, and then you will lose marks. So if you are asked for two, write two that you are sure of. I can never emphasize that enough. Okay, let's go back to the question. Natural selection is an important part of speciation. We saw, because it happens independently in each population. List 4 observations that Charles Darwin made around the Galapagos Islands that led to his theory of natural selection. With this question, I know most of you wanted to look for the Galapagos Island here on this map, and it is not here. This is from the background information that you know about Charles Darwin, that when he did his observations, he did them in the Galapagos Island. He worked mainly with the finches, with the tortoises. He spent a lot of time there studying nature and the phenomenon, trying to explain. So this is background information. There is no Galapagos Island on this map over here. And another mishap that may have arose from this question is that you may have thought that they want you to just talk about his history and the history that you did not study. They are actually asking you about his theory. When he came with the theory of evolution, what were his observations? What did he see? So some of you did not see that they are actually asking you about Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. You thought they were asking you about his history or what he thought, and you were asking yourself that you don't know what he thought, but he actually told you. So these are the things. This is what he observed. First, a population produces a large number of offspring, which shows variation. This is the first statement. He observed that there's a great variation, there's a great deal of variation. Even if you had written that there's a great deal of variation, he saw that there's a great deal of variation, you are still going to get a mark, because that is his observation. Then he also observed that some individuals have favorable characteristics and some do not. I know some of you are pinching yourselves there to say, we did not see this question in this way. Now, when there was a change in the environmental conditions, the organs with the favorable characteristics will survive, and the organisms with favorable and with unfavorable characteristics will die. Then organisms that survive will reproduce. Then and pass the allele for the favorable characteristics onto the next generation. So mark the first 4 only. So make sure that you get your points correctly. So I know this might have tricked a lot of you, that you thought they were asking you about something that you don't know. They were actually asking you about Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. So we can say it was a higher order for you. Then we are done with evolution by natural selection. Then you come to human evolution. With human evolution, there are a few things that you need to know that will get you marks, that they are going to ask you about. They are in the exam guideline. It's a guaranteed. They say to you, you must be able to interpret phylogenetic trees. So if they give you a phylogenetic tree, you must not be surprised. So you see, they are already telling you. The exam guideline is already preparing you. It's giving you the scope, remember. So if you ignore the scope, then it means you don't want to pass. Make sure that you pay attention to this, what is written in the exam guideline, because whoever is setting the exam is using that exam guideline to ask you questions. So it's like you have your questions before you even sit for the exam. Think of it that way. Now, an example is, who is the common ancestor? Who is extinct? When did the species on the diagram originate? How long did they live for? And when did they become extinct? Meaning, you must be able to read it. Tell us, this organism, this homo, the ancestor is this one. The ancestor lived for how long? It lived for how long? It became extinct here, when? So that interpretation, you may be asked about a phylogenetic tree. This one, the similarities. I said to you, remember that popo, I don't know what to call it, but I will show you what I'm talking about. It's in your mind, the gap. Your national mind, the gap has this. These similarities, you must write them. You have plenty. You have a lot. You have about 11 or 12. So try to use your body. Remember, we said you must use your body from head to toe so you can remember what are those shared similarities. Once you see the word similarities, remember that thing that I'm going to show you now. Then the differences also, look at the skull, bipedalism, what brings bipedalism, the position of the foramen magnum in the skull, the spinal cord, what is the shape, which one has an S shape, which one has a C shape, and then the pelvis, which one is wider, is narrow and wide or broad, which one is long. You see, you must know those differences and etc., including the palate, the arrangement of the teeth, the dentition, the diastema. You see all those things. The sizes of the canines, you must know those differences. And then fossil genetics and cultural evidence. So this is where you must know which fossils were found in South Africa, by whom and when. So they are the ones that are providing evidence for human evolution. So we have the cradle of humankind here in South Africa, and a lot of fossils were found there. Know your fossils. And then also out of Africa hypothesis. Then you are done with human evolution. It's not much to actually grasp, because when I tell you that these are things that will give you marks, when they ask you about out of Africa hypothesis, if you don't know it, you must be worried. Then you must go and make sure that you know it, because definitely they are going to ask you about it. And it is important to recognize the question, right? So that is talking about the same thing. So what is a phylogenetic tree? A phylogenetic tree is a schematic form that shows evolutionary relationships. Do not confuse this with a pedigree diagram. Pedigree diagram is looking at the genetic relationship, but this one, evolutionary relationships, meaning it shows you the organisms, how they evolved from a common ancestor. And from that phylogenetic tree, you must be able to see what is the common ancestor, who is extinct, when did the species on the diagram become extinct, or when did it originate, how long did they live for, and when did they become extinct. And the phyllo in the phylogenetic tree stands for the organism's phylum group. Remember when you did in grade 11 classification, and then the genetic, it is from the genes, or the relationship between the genes. So phylogenetic trees is the one that we deal with when we talk about human evolution. So it looks something like this. So always. And with a phylogenetic tree, it might be facing upward, downward, sideways to the right, sideways to the left. So you need to be careful to see where is the past, where is the present. If you can, and you can identify that in a phylogenetic tree, you will be able to interpret going forward. So with this one, this is the past. Remember, we go back in time. 5 million years ago. So it is the past, and the present will be here. So you need to identify that. And then when you have identified the past, you know that the first organism that you find there will be our common ancestor. So the common ancestor for the hominids, remember you must know the hominidae family. What are the common ancestor? The common ancestor for the hominidae is Australopithecus afarensis. So meaning this is the oldest common ancestor of the hominids, is Australopithecus afarensis. Now, Australopithecus afarensis, then it will branch. When you see a phylogenetic tree branching like this, you know what comes after the branch is the descendants. It comes after, it is the descendant of that particular organism. And then here also, it will descend to form the Homo habilis. So Homo habilis will be, so when you are asked to say what is the most recent common ancestor for Homo erectus and Homo robustus, follow Homo erectus and Homo robustus. The most recent common ancestor for those two will be Homo habilis. So you see, right? And then when you see that you see when the line stops here with Australopithecus robustus, the A stands for Australopithecus, because we've started with Australopithecus. Actually, it goes back to Adipithecus, but Adipithecus is the the oldest, the eldest is Adipithecus group, and then followed by the Australopithecines, and then you have your Homo group and the Australopithecus robustus becoming extinct here. You see this line does not continue. Then if the line does not continue, it means it becomes extinct. And then you see the chimpanzees branched from a far branch. However, it is still living up to this day currently with what? With the Homo sapiens. So this is where you can argue with people who say that we have evolved from the chimpanzees. No, it means us, the Homo sapiens, and the chimpanzees share a common ancestor in the Australopithecus afarensis. And it is because of what? That evidence that was given. So that is how you read a phylogenetic tree, and then if it branches like this, you see that there is a formation of new species. So this will indicate speciation. So that is how you read your phylogenetic tree. Follow, use a ruler where you need to for you to get those marks. So this is what I was talking about when they ask you about the similarities. If you have this in mind, from head to toe, you use your own body. Sitting in the exam, when you use your hand, when you use your skull, you use your eyes, you remember what you have to say about all those. So let us quickly take a look at the similarities. The first one, when you think of the head, this is what you must think of. The similarities that we share with the African apes is that we have large brains or large skulls compared to the body masses. So large brain, large skull. Then eyes are in front, or we have binocular vision or stereoscopic vision. You can get a mark for that. Those things are similar in us and them. And then number 3, freely rotating arm. You can rotate your arm, rotate your whole arm. You can see that it will freely rotate. And when you think of all of these African apes, they can also do the same thing. So we share this characteristic together with them. Long upper arms. So longer upper arms. So our humerus here is long, you see. Then we have an elbow joint allowing for the free rotation of the forearm. So this is the upper arm and this is your forearm. So the elbow joint is allowing for the free rotation of the forearm. And then 5 fingers. Hi. Even if you can forget, you can't just forget that we share 5 fingers with them. Good people, please. Right. And then number 7, opposable thumb. So opposable thumb, look at the thumb. Look at the other fingers. These 4 fingers are going downwards inside. This one is going this way, meaning this finger is working in an opposite direction to the rest of the fingers. So it is an opposable thumb, and it is the one that allows for a precision grip. Then you have 8 flat nails instead of claws, or fingertips with fingerprints. So look at yourself in the exam. Look at your body. Remember these similarities. Then 2 mammary glands in front. We share that in common with them. And then eyes have rods. I have cones. Color vision, color. It's cones. Eyes have cones. Then the last one will be sexual dimorphism. There is a distinct difference between the male and the female, between us and them. So you can know because the males have their different organs and the females also, they have their different organs. So these signs inside these ones, see, the ones that show the males and the females, will remind you that you are talking about sexual dimorphism. Right. And then the differences. When you are given the skulls, be able to differentiate. When you are given the palate, when you are given the pelvic bone, when you are given the spinal cord, just know which one is of the human, which one is of the African ape. That is not so difficult. You can check. Right, let us start with the bipedalism. Bipedalism is brought about the position of the foramen magnum in the humans being in a more forward position. So you don't say it's underneath the skull. You say it is in a more forward position because when you look at the evolution of where it comes, it came from the back of the skull, now moving in a more forward position. So from the apes, it was here at the back of the skull, and then when the organism kept out of evolving, the foramen magnum position was therefore found where to in a more forward position. So that is why we use the word forward position, whereas the one with African apes was at the back of the skull. Why? Because the attachment of the vertebral column or the axis and the atlas there, it will allow for quadrupedalism if the foramen magnum is at the back of the skull. And then in the humans, it allows for bipedalism, walking on two legs. And then why? Because of the attachment of the vertebral column is going to be in a vertical position. You see? Then the spine, therefore, will be in an S shape. But the spine of the African apes is in a C shape. Remember, they are walking on all fours. So once you see the C shape, you know this is an African ape. This is of a human. Then the pelvis. The pelvis is that bone here. Right. That bone, the pelvic bone, is shorter and wider with of the humans, and then for the African apes it is longer and now. So these ones you just have to be able to compare. Then the cranium size, our cranium size is larger. Once you see a large cranium, remember we are not talking about the whole skull. The cranium. You don't say a large skull. You say a large cranium, because you see others have big skulls, but the cranium is small like this. Remember. Then the craniums of the African apes is smaller, and then the palate is round. The palate is the arrangement of the jaws. For the humans, it's more rounded, but the palate of the African ape is more rectangular. The dentition, we don't have gaps between our teeth. So even if you have a gap, it's not a big gap that can be called a diastema. However, they have gaps present between their teeth, and it is called a diastema. And our canines are smaller, their canines are large, and there's a reason for that. Go check, because they have to tear raw meat and do that, but we are eating more softer food, hence we evolved to have smaller canines. And then non-prognathuous, their faces, we have flat faces. If you take a ruler and you are able to draw a line straight like this, then it means it's a flat face. But the African apes, their faces are more like this. If you take a ruler, you will draw a line like that. So it is a sloping face. And then the cranial and the brow ridges are absent. So the cranial ridge is that bone that will be in between, that high there between the cranium, and then the brow ridges are what the bones that you find here on top of the eyes. So ours are not absent. They are absent. They are not present. And then with the cranial ridge and the brow ridges in the African apes, they are present. So look out for those differences. So here I'm expecting you to get total when you are asked about the differences and the similarities. So this is what we were talking about. All of these bones, you must be able to differentiate them according to the way we've just differentiated. So things that you need to look out for also: fossil evidence. What fossil evidence was used, and then the genetic evidence, mitochondrial DNA, and tool making. So you're going to study this. Study the table in a table form, the fossils that are found in South Africa, and be able to know the scientists that found them, when and where. So that is what you need to study. And then you know the out of Africa hypothesis as it appears from the exam guideline. What does it say? It says that originally species originated from Africa, the hominid species. Now, what evidence did they give to support the hypothesis? You see, this one is not a theory, it's just a hypothesis. They support that by looking at this. Ardipithecus, remember I said it's the oldest. Fossils are found in Africa only. So there's nowhere where they found the Ardipithecus fossils. Then it shows you what? The eldest ancestor of the hominid is found where? In Africa. So that can prove that the hominid species originated where? In Africa. Then Australopithecus fossils are found in Africa only, nowhere else in the world. So these ones are the only. And then Homo habilis is found in Africa only. The oldest fossils of Homo erectus found in Africa, whilst the youngest fossils were found in other parts of the world. So if the oldest is found here, then it means it originated here, because old becomes comes first before new. And then they were able to trace this using mitochondrial DNA, because it shows that the mutations in the mitochondrial DNA, they trace the oldest female ancestor to East Africa, therefore supporting what? Hominids originated where? In Africa. So please go work on your worksheet. Go work on the questions from previous question papers that are dealing with evolution, and practice everything that we have talked about today. For you to get those marks, that 54 marks, I have given you that 54 marks today as raw as it is. Go and practice, check the marking guideline, because I have taken the questions that you were faced with in your preliminary question paper. Check how we've answered those questions and practice, practice, practice. There is no way that you are going to pass without practicing. It does not end here. So we have come now to the end of today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching this lesson. I will see you again next time. Goodbye.